And we keep things rolling here on the Sports Cubicle on a Super Bowl Sunday. But right now, while we're waiting to see who's going to hoist that trophy tonight, I want to talk about a man that hoisted some trophies in his days. But first, I got to talk about the man that wrote the book. He is author of Water, Mere Echo, Bruce Lee, and the Making of Asian America. He's none other than Jeff Chang. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here.
So, Jeff, literally on the surface, you got a picture of Bruce Lee. This on the surface looks like a biography about Bruce Lee. But when you dive into this book more, it's not just about Bruce Lee. It's more about his impact on Asian America and the culture, a deep dive into that Asian American culture as a whole. So, my question is, what inspired you to make this not just a biography, but basically two books in one?
Yeah, yeah, it is two books in one in a lot of ways. Man, I had gotten the book contract a long time ago to do this biography of Bruce Lee, but there's a lot of biographies of Bruce Lee out there, and so I was struggling to trying to find the way to do it right. And honestly, during the pandemic, things kind of became clear. Bruce became a symbol in our communities of strength, of pride, if you will. There's a lot of stuff happening during the pandemic to Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and the image of Bruce came back, and I was just like, oh, that's what it's about. This is what it's gonna be about. So the book kind of weaves together the story of how we come to the U.S. and the kind of context, the kind of environments, neighborhoods that Bruce grew up in, and how that really makes him, in many ways, become the hero that we all know and love.
So, Jeff, when you're writing this story and you're dealing with somebody who's such a titan, not just in one specific thing, but just in life in general, right? Like here in Chicago, how many home runs did Frank Thomas and Sammy Sosa hit? Or obviously the biggest legend of them all, Michael Jordan, and all the blues artists that we had over the years,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
just all the musicians and whatnot, and dealing with somebody like Bruce Lee. What was a legend or a myth or a story that you found fascinating to be true, because there's so many in the well that is the
Mm.
Bruce Lee story, and the tale of such a big icon in modern day society? What was one of those stories that really surprised you that in fact was a true one?
Well, a lot of folks are like, he could never really beat any of these guys, in the octagon nowadays. He didn't have it at all. And there's a lot of internet talk about that kind of thing. But, if you go back to that time, Bruce was really revered by a lot of the martial artists as one of the main guys. Even though he never competed, he didn't like to compete. That's a whole other thing that we could talk about. He didn't like the sport of it. He really wanted to learn fighting for the art of fighting. But he had skills, man. I mean, he was really fast. Everybody that talks to him, we talk about like the top martial artists of the time, the folks who are actually competing and winning, and the Chuck Norrises of the world, right? They would rave about his speed, about his power for the size of him, 5 feet, 7 or 8, 120 pounds, that he was punching way above his weight. And so all of that is true. He wasn't just a movie actor, in that regard. He was really a guy that came in and changed the face of martial arts and really made Asian martial arts, what they are today. So I think that thing was definitively proven to me by talking to all the people that I got to talk to.
The book stresses the cultural impact that Bruce Lee had on Asian Americans, but what cultural impact did he have on Asian Americans during his life and after? And was it noticeably increased after his death?
I think so. I think during his lifetime, the younger Asian Americans looked at him and was like, I don't know about this guy. He's running around, he's kicking butt for this guy, the Green Hornet. It's kind of a cartoon character. I don't know if we like him, and then he came out with these movies, and he really captured the soaring pride that you had happening amongst the communities, in the late 60s and the 1970s, when the term Asian American actually comes into being. So he was that guy that after he passed away so suddenly, people were like recognizing him. He was like their hero because he represented the underdog. And this is not just, of course, Asian Americans. I mean, this is Black Americans, white Americans. Hispanic Americans. It's everybody. Everybody's looking at him as somebody who represents the underdog. Which is, I think, just a classic kind of a American kind of story in a way, right? And so that's who he comes to be after his untimely passing.
We're speaking with Jeff Chang, the author of Water, Mirror, Echo, Bruce Lee, and the Making of Asian America. And Jeff, I want to ask you a lot about this title because without giving away too much from the book, obviously, why would you name a book about Bruce Lee and Asian America, Water, Mirror, and Echo?
It's actually interesting because, all of us probably have heard the term "be like water," right? And
Yeah.
attribute that to Bruce. This is something that's huge, obviously in sports, right? You talk about countless athletes who've been inspired by that. LeBron James, Klay Thompson, like one of my all times. All these folks refer to Bruce after they have these games. I was just in the zone. I was being like water. And as I was studying and reading and stuff, I would see this coming back over and over again, this phrase that he kind of glommed onto when he was really young. And the phrase is, moving, be like water. But then there's two other parts to it. Moving, be like water. Still, be like a mirror. Respond like an echo. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, what does that even mean? I don't even know now, There's so many layers to it. And as I studied and I got to read through his papers and listen to his friends and his family talk about him, this is one thing that came back to him through his whole life. So this particular poem, moving be like water, still be like a mirror, respond like an echo, just seemed like a really poetic way to kind of capture who he was. He was a philosopher as well as a fighter. And this is a phrase that came from Asian philosophies. It came from, Taoism and Zen Buddhism. And so this is something that I wanted to kind of wrap the whole book around, his whole life story around.
Jeff, before we get to the entertainer that was Bruce Lee, we talked a lot about the athlete. And, I've been lucky and privileged enough to have interviewed and talked with some of the greatest UFC fighters of all time, from Demetrius Johnson to Robert Whitaker to Cowboy Cerrone, so on and so forth, that you can check on our YouTube channel over at the Sports Cubicle. And you're somebody who I really want to pick your brain about, somebody who is kind of the Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Hulk Hogan, the gold standard, the where it all started and how so many people have been inspired. But it wasn't just that he was kick-ass, right? I think about Chuck Norris. You bring him up, one of the greatest movies of Bruce Lee's catalog has Chuck Norris in it itself, right? But Chuck Norris, for a lot of generation of people, it wasn't just, from that or Walker, Texas Ranger. It was his exercise machine. And Bruce Lee is kind of the poster child of health and that era of what you were eating, the nutrition, the stretching, the exercise, the muscle specific workouts. How much of an inspiration, besides just being an ass kicker, besides beyond being entertaining and a philosopher, what he did for people, the athlete's body, and how important it is as a temple for so many people. What in your research and years of dedication for Bruce Lee and obviously the sports, is that a big part of his story? Is the fitness nutrition part of it?
Huge. It's really huge. I mean, when you're going through his diaries, one of the things you find is he's actually meticulously cutting down every day his warm-ups, So he's like, yeah, I'll do 500 push-ups to start, and then he'll talk about after that, he'll get up and he'll run, a few miles and stuff, and he'll come back and he just talks about all of the things that he's doing for his body. He got into a fight in Oakland with a guy that was from Hong Kong. It was a sort of a secret fight. This guy named Wang Jiakman, and there's a lot of debates and sort of stories about who won the fight. But Bruce ultimately, because of the fight, was embarrassed because he found that he was chasing this guy around the room, and he was winded. And he was like, I thought I was a martial artist. I thought I should be able to beat this guy in seconds. And so, from that point on in his life, he made it a thing to just really, really intensify his workouts to the point where he actually really hurt himself in one of his workouts and actually had to work through severe pain through the rest of his life. He hurt his back. But because of that, he really made it a part of who he was, and his friends would be like, "Wow, man, why are you trying a drink with like raw ground beef in there, along with a whole bunch of protein powders and that kind of thing?" Well, I'm just I'm trying to figure out ways to make my diet so that I can be ahead of everybody. So he was trying out all kinds of things all the time, and I think that you know. Had he survived, maybe he would have completely revolutionized the way that we think about the full body, the full fitness and that kind of thing, and the way he would have accelerated that particular process that we start to pick up on in the 70s and the 80s. This culture that comes out of California of bodybuilding and fitness and all of that kind of stuff. He might have accelerated that a lot more. That wasn't really discovered until after he had passed away. But it was a huge, huge, huge part of his training, and it was a huge part of what it made him as a fighter.
So I think even to like the casual observer, a lot of people know that Bruce Lee kind of trained and taught, his martial arts, and also acted in television and film. But I don't think a lot of people know like what made him want to make that leap. In your words, what made him want to make that leap?
Hmm. He started off as an actor, right? As a kid, he was a child actor with all the baggage that comes with that, right? He kind of goes through a tough teenhood and that kind of thing. But he was an actor as a kid. As a baby, a few months old, he was on the screen. And then when he goes back to Hong Kong, he becomes a star at the age of like 9. And so all through his life, he's an actor. And he gets into too many fights in Hong Kong. So his parents are like, "Oh, you're up and out of here because you're gonna get yourself killed. There's a lot of folks out on the streets that are looking for you. So we're gonna send you back to the U.S. where you were born." And and then he's basically nobody then, and he leans into his martial arts and his interest in Asian philosophy, and he only comes back to the screen by an accident. He does this exhibition in Long Beach, and there's a lot of Hollywood folks in the audience, and so there's a TV show that comes up, and this guy's like, "Why don't you audition for it?" And he goes out, he auditions for the part. The show doesn't get made, but he ends up getting this part on the Green Hornet. It's all an accident. It's all completely an accident that he gets back on screen. During this time, he's working on the martial arts, and he's pioneering the martial arts, and he's actually mixing up all of these different types of Asian and non-Asian martial arts forms into a new style that he's calling Jeet Kune Do. And in fact, because of this, people start coming to him. They start flocking to him, and becomes a teacher for all these folks. And so for him, coming back to the screen is in his mind, he's thinking, this is a way that I can actually publicize Asian fighting arts, my own brand of it, and it's a way that I can popularize Asian philosophies and Asian ideas. And so that's what propels him back to the screen, and he eventually becomes the star that we know of.
I do want to go back to the Green Hornet there, Jeff, because it is kind of funny that you mentioned the show was an accident, because when you look at Bruce Lee's acting career as an adult, that's kind of what, skyrocketed him a little bit. I mean, other countries referred to the Green Hornet as the Kato show. I mean, he definitely had a thing. It was a role that was a stereotype and very cartoony, like you said, but Bruce Lee found a way to make that his own, and it kind of really grew him, and it gave a different sort of perception of Asian Americans. Would you agree or disagree?
Totally agree. Completely
Scared
agree.
me.
Completely agree. I mean, I always marvel at the fact he's given like this little box that he's going to be put in, right? He's the sidekick, he's the driver, he's the cook. He has to save the Green Hornet's butt every time, the Green Hornet gets out there in every episode, because the Green Hornet can't fight. Kato can fight. And so because of that, Kato becomes more popular than the Green Hornet in many ways. Some part during the season, the Kato toys start outselling the Green Hornet toys. People are just like, who is this masked man, And the thing is, he's like trying to use it as a platform to be able to popularize Asian martial arts. So people are hearing about karate at the time. Elvis Presley's taking karate, but they don't really know about these types of fighting styles. And Bruce has got this whole different thing. It's a Chinese art called Kung Fu, and nobody's ever heard of it before. And he's able to convince, the producers and the directors that he can be that guy who can introduce this thing. And so by the end of the season, the show hasn't done really well, but everybody is interested in Bruce Lee and Kung Fu. And that's sort of the start of him really beginning to popularize Asian martial arts all around the world.
Jeff, what's the relationship like as you've done the research? And, there's so many different levels of experts and fandom of Bruce Lee that his importance is obviously that big and his impact. But there have been other big time, from Jackie Chan to Jet Li, Danny Yang. Like you just go down the entire list of like the greatest, most entertaining from Rush Hour to Star Wars. We've seen the impact, right? What were there? What was Bruce's relationship with other actors, other martial artists, other stars from that region, from where he was from the same neighborhoods and groups that he comes from? And how is their relationship with him? Because right now we obviously have the years of adoration, admiration, but what was it like at that time between all of them in that living situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, Bruce started as a street fighter. So he's out there in the streets, during the 1950s. And he's basically a teenager who loves the taste of blood, On the one hand, he's this actor, so he's like wearing these cashmere sweaters and dancing cha-cha, right, on the big screen. But he really likes mixing it up. He's, part of this street fighting culture that's huge and has overtaken Hong Kong during the 1950s. Because you got to remember, there's just young people in the streets. All of the people have come in as refugees from the Chinese Civil War after 1949, right? So there's just these young men all over the streets, and they're getting into these groups, and they're challenging each other. And there's this thing called Beimo fight culture, where it's literally like, oh man, you got that style? Well, I got this style. Let's test each other. And they get into fights. And so everybody knows Bruce. He's got a rep in the streets. And a lot of these same kids that are in there that look up to him are also the folks who become the actors when Kung Fu movies start coming out. So Jackie Chan, right, is one of those folks. Jackie is in Enter the Dragon. There's a scene in the underground where Bruce is breaking his neck, basically, right?
Yeah,
he's an extra, right?
Yeah.
So Bruce is one of these folks who kind of helps to really popularize Kung Fu movies, first in Hong Kong, and then, of course, all around the world. And all these folks, they're looking up to him because they remember his rep from the streets. And they're also seeing how he does it. He does it completely different from all the other Kung Fu movie stars. He's trying to do the fighting in not this sort of choreographed kind of way, but almost in a real type of fight. Like he's trying to end these guys as soon as possible. And so that's why you get this thing of like these scenes where hundreds of people are attacking, because he's trying to show how fast he can actually do away with these guys. Jackie Chan becomes one of those victims. And so they want to be him because they're like, oh, he's bringing what we used to do on the streets. He's bringing that onto the screen. Like we know how to do that. And so a lot of these younger folks, they all look up to him. All the folks you mentioned, Jackie Chan directly, but then of course Jet Li, Donnie Yen, everybody who comes afterwards.
It sounds like, based on your knowledge of Bruce Lee, that this wasn't like a stretch for you to be able to kind of dig in and learn about him and be able to tell his story. But was there something along the research that you found to be kind of unique that maybe you didn't know beforehand, or what most people probably wouldn't know beforehand?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing that struck me was that he was so he felt really isolated and vulnerable, he was one of these guys that kind of saw the landscape before everybody else could. He was at the mountaintop, right? He saw what this could be. And even when nobody believed in him, he was like, that's where I'm going to take folks. But nobody believed in him at all, right? Hong Kong, like they didn't necessarily believe in him, Hollywood certainly didn't believe in him. They had a little box for him that he was going to sit in forever, which was Sidekick. And he had to leave Hollywood because he knew that he was the main character. And even Hong Kong at the beginning, they were just like, we don't know about this particular style that you're trying to do. And so he forged this kind of a maverick type of career. But because of that, he was always lonely. He was always on his own. He had a lot of friends around him, but people couldn't necessarily understand where he's coming from. And when people were like when he was trying to explain to folks what he was trying to do, people would be like, "Wow, that's amazing," but they could never see how it could ever happen. So he was very vulnerable, and that's the thing that I picked up in a lot of his papers was that he was sad a lot of the time, that he was despairing a lot of the time, but he persevered, and that's why we got to Enter the Dragon. But a lot of friends will tell me that's what killed him. That sure he died, because of whatever types of cerebral edema, brain swelling was the reason that they gave in the autopsy, but it was his ambition that kind of like spelled it for him in a lot of ways. And they say that with sadness because they really believed in him, but he scaled heights that nobody else was trying to climb.
Now, Jeff, I want to talk about Bruce Lee and the martial artist side because when it
Yeah.
came to America, we didn't really have a martial arts till Robert Trias, the father of modern day karate and such. And American audiences didn't really know much about karate till a 1980 film called The Karate Kid. But we look at this,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
But we look at this, Bruce Lee really did have a lot of people's sort of, yeah, I guess, first introduction to sort of that style. So my question is, where does Bruce Lee fit into this bringing karate to a modern day sport that, kids still do to this day?
He was it. He was the man that actually popularized martial arts on a global level. He was the guy. There's nobody else, and that's why every mixed martial artist that you talk to, they'll always say, "Yeah, at some point they were inspired by Bruce Lee." Every martial artist will say that now. I think too. There's very few people who are left from Robert Trias's time. But before Bruce Lee, it was an underground sport, right? It was a thing where these karate schools were set up across the country from the 1950s on, and they were practicing in their own kinds of ways. And then you get people like Ed Parker from Hawaii, who begins to train much more prominent people, who popularizes it in Hollywood. And then Ed Parker starts connecting with all these other folks from all these other martial arts. And Bruce is part of the generation where, before that, you were in a school and you followed everything that the Sifu did, and you might not ever learn all of the real inside things about that particular fighting art, right? And you just went in a very linear way, right? And Bruce came in and he was part of this, generation of people who are like, nah, that's not how it's going to work in the street. Like, can I really use that in the street? Like, you're teaching me how to do a punch in a certain kind of way. Like, I got a punch here from my waist, right? What if somebody's swinging from my head? Like, how's that going to work? And so he and this generation of folks, they're all testing. They're folks who are coming from all these different types of schools. And a lot of these folks are coming from Hawaii because mixed martial arts really starts in Hawaii, right? This is where a lot of people are coming from different fight styles and they're testing each other 2 generations before Bruce comes along. But he is part of this rising generation, and he is the one that has enough kind of charisma to be able to make the case to all of these folks. He pisses a lot of people off in the 1960s because he's in the magazine saying, man, what does your fight style really get you? Like, can you try that technique and really make it work in a fight? And meanwhile, him and all his friends have been like trying to test these techniques and seeing if they really work or not, and discarding them, or they're mixing them up, or they're saying, oh, this one really works, we're going to keep that. And that's when we get to mixed martial arts these days, right? Where, we've got the groundwork, we've got the upright work, the standing work, and all the stuff in between. And all of these different types of tactics and styles and things like that are part of one way that even the kids are getting trained now. That's all going back to this particular generation. But Bruce is the one, because he brings it to the screen, who's able to actually make it understandable to people all around the world.
Jeff, there was one name I wanted to bring up too. We were talking about the impacts of Bolo. Shout out to our boy at Bolo, of course. And
Ooh.
yeah, I know, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. We couldn't forget it. He'll come after us. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Brisk, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Bruce Lee story, Enter the Dragon, all the memoirs, all the books, all the stories. Who was Bruce Lee?
Just who was he?
Who was he? Was
I
he
think-
was he
yeah.
the guy we think is, or was there more to who was he, in your opinion?
I mean, I think that he was in some ways. I mean, by now he's a legend. He's kind of above us in a way. And so one of the reasons I wrote the book was to be able to say, hey, this guy obviously he ate, drank, and slept, and walked through the same world that folks from previous generations while he was human. And so I wanted to capture all of that. I wanted to really kind of get down to the nitty gritty of it. And in doing so, you have to get through the worlds that he walked through, so you have to get through San Francisco, Chinatown. You got to talk about Hong Kong after the war, the Chinese Civil War, right? You got to talk about, moving back to the U.S. and living in racially segregated communities, right? That's where he came up. He didn't come up in wealthy communities. He was there on the street, with poor white folks, with black folks. His first student was black, right? With a mixed, group of folks. And then when you get to that, you kind of really understand, here's a guy who had a lot of vision, and he actually becomes the hero of all of us, right? Even us puny little kids who are getting bullied on the playground, right? He becomes a hero of all of us because he begins to really understand what it means to be mistreated, and what it means to be able to stand up, to be that David, fighting the Goliath. And so I think that's who Bruce remains to today. That's why we still talk about him, and we don't talk about, one of his best friends, Steve McQueen, who was the biggest star in the world at that particular time, right? We don't talk about Steve McQueen like that, but we talk about Bruce that way all around the world. Anywhere I go, we'll have a conversation about Bruce Lee, because he represents that every person in a way. And that's because of the things that he went through in his life. And so it was just a joy to be able to work on this for as long as I did. It was a long time that I worked on it. And it's a privilege to be able to retell his story.
Well, before we let you go, Jeff, I wanted to ask something specifically about you. Just looking at your works, that shelf in the library of your works is so impressive that you're building right now with the addition of this book. I'm looking, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, a hip hop history, Who We Be, the colorization of America, We Gonna Be All Right, notes on race and resegregation. It seems like culture, politics, race is very influential in your works. I know you're still advertising this book. It's still new on the shelves, but what's the next book in line? What's piqued your interest for the next one? At the very least, I'm not saying what are you working on right now, but what's kind of your dream for your future works?
Wow, man, thanks for the question. And also, I'm going to avoid it because it's like last year when people were asking me, when the book had just come out, the book's only been on the shelves now for what, 5 months or something like that? 4 months, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't want to put you to work right away.
What's that?
I didn't want to put you to work right away, but I'm just curious. It's such an impressive catalog that you're building right now.
I appreciate it. A lot of this stuff was accidental. I became a hip hop fan when I was a little kid, and so I find myself deep in the hip hop movement. We start up this label with DJ Shadow and Black Alicious and Latyrix Lyrics Born and Latif and I'm like, hey, maybe I'll just write a book about this stuff, and that's cool. Kind of how it's been accidental. So I've just kind of followed my curiosity through the whole time, and because it Can't Stop, Won't Stop, I got offered this Bruce Lee biography. And so now I'm kind of I'm thinking about things. It'll probably be something that I'll have to do, with popular culture, but also probably with, there's always big issues, but there's got to be a story behind it. So I'm looking for that right now. That was my way of eluding your question.
It's actually a really good answer. I'm looking forward to whatever is next, but it's so neat just seeing what you put out there already and adding this to the collection is just so nice. The Bruce Lee and the making of Asia, America, Water, Mirror, Echo. But yeah, Jeff, thank you so much.
Yeah. Jeff, if anyone wants to find out more about you or grab this book or any of your books, where can they go?
They can go to jeffchang.net, watermirrorecho.net, or they can catch me on Instagram at Zentronics.
Jeff Chang, the author of Water, Mirror, Echo, Bruce Lee, and the Making of Asian America. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're going to contact you when the next book comes out.
Appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
We got more coming up next on this edition of the Sports Cubicle here on WCPT 820 AM, heartlandsignal.com, WSBC 1240 AM, Chicago, and on YouTube at the Sports Cubicle. He's Devin Tingle. He's Paul Shivari. I'm Mike Mercado.